This is what we've got coming up for you in today's show.
It's not a regulated industry, editing. So anybody in theory could call themselves an editor without any formal training. I wouldn't recommend it. And I would always ask if you are wanting to work with an editor to always check their credentials.
Welcome to the All Things Books Show, hosted by award-winning best-selling mystery author Dawn Brooks. Publishing has changed beyond recognition in recent years. Join Dawn as she interviews authors, narrators, and many more from across the creative community. This inspiring and informative show is for readers and writers.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the All Things Books Show. If you don't know about it, I'm Dawn Brooks. I write cozy crime and crime fiction, and I try to interview people about anything to do with books or writing or reading, and also I sometimes ramble on myself. But this week, you'll be pleased to hear, I'm not going to ramble on. I've got Jessica Brown, who is an editor of non-fiction work. So I'm going to bring Jessica in and then we'll start the chat. Hi, Jessica.
Hi, Dawn. Nice to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. And Jessica is joining us today from England, not too far away from me. Last time I interviewed someone, they were in the US, so the time difference was huge, but hopefully we won't lose sound and connection and all that kind of thing that goes horribly wrong. Jessica, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you are before I start asking you some questions about editing?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Jessica and I'm a non-fiction book editor, as you introduced me so very kindly. And I run a book editing and design business. We work predominantly with entrepreneurs, speakers, thought leaders, people that are writing a book to grow their business and to help people. So that's kind of what we do. My background, however, is kind of a little bit, we were talking about this before, a bit of an unconventional route into editing. So I started off, I was in the military for 13 years in the Royal Air Force. And that was amazing in many ways. But then I had my children, met my husband, we had the babies, and the military life just wasn't compatible with family life anymore. There was lots of deployments, and especially with my particular trade, there was a requirement to move quite often, and I just wanted a bit more stability. So it was at that point, after my second child, that I decided I was going to have to leave the military and start my second career. And so that's what I did. Initially, I didn't go into editing straight away. I tried the private sector for a little bit, but I still needed a little bit more freedom, a bit more flexibility, especially with the young children and a husband who is also in the military, so works away quite a lot. And we don't have family nearby. So being flexible was kind of key for me. My background, my academic background is languages and linguistics.
Okay.
So I always had an interest in words and the power of words and how we can use words to create certain effects. And so I always had that interest. Also, being in the military, very detail orientated. So moving into proofreading and editing seemed like quite a natural progression for me. So I trained professionally in both proofreading and editing. And then my first paid work was for a publishing house that publishes military history books.
Wow.
So it was a good kind of introduction, obviously linked to my military background, but also really helped build up my experience and understanding of industry standards and the whole publishing process.
And you understood the lingo when you were editing.
Well, exactly.
That's often the thing when because they have their own. I come from a background in nursing, and we have our own vocabulary,
acronyms and everything.
As does the military. So it is helpful when you do. I was going to say why editing. Then I think you've sort of partially answered that. So it was your interest in words and obviously your need for a flexible employment.
It was. I mean, I started off, initially I just thought I would proofread, and that was kind of the initial thought process. But then as I kind of did more and learnt more, I actually found that I really enjoyed the editing side and working closely with authors, working on more sentence level and kind of the line editing, and creating an impact and having that kind of being able to work with a client to really make the most of their words rather than just correcting things that are wrong. That really appealed to me. And so that's why I moved more into that side of things.
So tell me, you said you trained. I was going to ask, is there any formal training to be an editor? Or we had a proofreader on a little while ago, and although there isn't a formal course as such, but there are lots of courses you can do, which she had done. And yourself, what did you do?
Yeah, so it's not a regulated industry, editing. So anybody in theory could call themselves an editor without any formal training. I wouldn't recommend it. And I would always ask if you are wanting to work with an editor to always check their credentials. However, for me, so it was important for me, for my own confidence, as well as obviously for my clients, was to do that professional training. So I trained with the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading. I did proofreading first and then copy editing. They do lots of different courses, so you can do a little bit more. You can focus on different areas and everything like that. So yeah, I would definitely recommend Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading. They're really good for anyone that wants to do some editorial training.
Start out in editing, and obviously you had a background in words and linguistics, and which helped.
Yeah. So I mean, the training doesn't help you so much with grammar knowledge. They do extra courses, so it does help massively. I mean, it is important to have a really strong grounding in the English language, and that's. I mean, I was fortunate because I had already done through my degree and built that up. So if it's something that you need to work on, that is something that you could do extra courses in.
So tell me, do you edit non-UK English books, and are you then required to speak the US lingo?
Yeah,
which is slightly different, and spelling.
It is. So most of my clients are based in the UK, but I've had clients in various different countries, actually, in Australia, New Zealand, in the States, in Europe. So I can edit in US language. I would always recommend to get a US based proofreader. If I was going to edit it, I would recommend getting a US based proofreader. However, as long as the author is US based, then those kind of problems don't really come into it. The problems are more if none of us are kind of familiar. That's where the problem is. There are nuances, obviously, between the two languages, which you have to learn, you have to be aware of. And there's software you can get also that can help you with that. But so I've worked with both American publishing houses and also self-publishing US-based clients.
Okay. And you said earlier, I mean, we'll come on to a bit more nitty-gritty of the editing, but you said you mentioned we when you were talking about your company. Is that you and somebody else?
So initially it was just me freelancing, and that's how it started. And then what I found is that many of my clients would come to me and they're writing a book. So obviously they don't just need the editing. They need the editing and the proofreading and the design and the formatting. And so they'd ask me for recommendations and things like that. Initially, I started just building a small team of associate proofreaders because, again, I really recommend having a different editor and proofreader rather than the same person, because your editor's already been very close to your work. So getting them to proofread it, they're more likely to miss things. So I built a small team of just associate proofreaders, and then over time built up the team. So now we have a formatter and a cover designer as well. So there's a small team of us, but we can now help guide people through pretty much the whole production process of the book.
So if somebody wanted just the editing, would they still be able to get just the editing? So if they want the whole package, do you pay these other people, or do they pay these other people and you just recommend them? Just trying to work out how.
So most of it's a flat fee, so they'll pay me, and then I'll obviously make sure everyone else is paid. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the object, because the idea is to make it life easier for the client.
Yeah.
So if they're having to still pay lots of different invoices and things, that's adding to the stress. So we project manage it.
Okay.
I do have two ghostwriters and developmental editors on the team, and they actually are associates. So I will recommend people to them instead, just because those projects can be a little bit more unique, and it's difficult. I can't really give, a set package price for a ghostwriting project, because it could be, the scope could be quite varied. But for like the editing, the proofreading, the typesetting and design, that's like a set service that we do.
Right. Well, I'd be very interested to interview a ghostwriter for this show sometime. So maybe you could make a recommendation.
I can hook you up, definitely.
Good. So for those who don't understand what ghostwriting is, just a very brief introduction before I interview your ghostwriter on another game.
So ghostwriting is essentially where somebody else will do the writing element for you. So with our business, because we work mostly with people that are business owners themselves, they offer a great idea for a book, but not necessarily the time to write it themselves, because they're busy running the business. So what a ghostwriter will do is they will come in and they will work with you and your ideas, and look at the content you've already got and interview you, and then together you'll work out kind of the bones of the book, and they will go away and they will write it.
I've got you. I mean, I actually know what a ghostwriter is, but
not everybody
does. And it sounds like, a friend of mine, I once said to her about a ghostwriter, and she said, well, I don't like the sound of that. I don't want any ghosts. I don't want to know about ghosts. I said, it's got nothing to do with
It's not scary, I promise.
I know we've just had Halloween, but no.
Yeah, it's very, very timely.
So let's get back to your editing then, and obviously we'll come on to some of the types of books you edit shortly. What are the most common mistakes you come across?
So I think every single book I've ever edited, and I'm sure it would be absolutely the same if I wrote a book, is repetitions and people repeating themselves without really realizing they're doing it. And we do it as humans. We do.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
We repeat ourselves, and it creeps into our writing as well. So that's one of the things that an editor looks out for, is the use of repeated words. Obviously, repetition can be used intentionally for certain literary effects,
habits and such like. But in your line of work, it's different.
It can be used. It can be quite powerful, but 90% of the time, people don't realise they're doing it, and it's creeping in. So that's probably the most common thing that I see. Specifically within non-fiction, is probably issues of copyright infringement. So where people are using other people's words, and it's not just not attributing, it's not just plagiarism, it's also making sure you've got permission to refer to their content and use some of what they've done. So that can be something that to bear in mind, and sometimes there have been issues where we've had to take bits out because we haven't got the permissions.
Yeah. I know obviously there's a fair usage rule, but even so, it can be a sticky wicket, can't it?
A lot of the time it does come down to fair use, but there are some rules where it's absolutely, a blanket kind of, you just can't do it, like song lyrics, for example.
Yes, I was going to say that. No, not unless you want to be fined millions of dollars.
No, it's not worth it. It's just not worth it.
No. You can use song titles, can't you?
Song titles are okay. As long as you stick to the title, then you're good. But you can't use the actual lyrics, unfortunately.
And yourself, when you're editing, do you use any form of software to help you out? Something like Pro-Writing Aid or Grammarly or anything like that?
So the only software obviously I use Word, so obviously I do run the spell check and the editor on there. But the only other software I use is, and I don't know if the proofreader you interviewed mentioned it, is something called Perfect It.
Yes. I think she did say she uses that.
So that's a really fantastic piece of software. It's basically a consistency checker. So it will pick up times when perhaps you've spelt something wrong. I mean, these are things that, not wrong, inconsistently. So maybe you've used a hyphen once and then later on you haven't used a hyphen. Or
yeah, I'm guilty of that. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, like if it was a small piece of text, then it's easier to pick up. But when you're dealing with, maybe a 70,000 word manuscript, the best will in the world, like you're not going to necessarily pick up all those inconsistencies.
No.
So that's where the software really comes into its own.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and so obviously I was going to say, do you have a specialist genre? I know people assume that non-fiction is all the same. It's all self-help books or memoirs or something, but it's more than that, isn't it? And do you have anything that you said branding, obviously for businesses that want to use the book and say, look, I'm an expert, I have a book. Is there anything you don't touch?
So the most of the books we work on are personal development, self-help, business related. Quite a few of my clients are writing spirituality books, and that's a personal interest of mine as well. So that's really nice to work on those kind of books. Memoirs as well. So that does tend to be the bulk of it. But then sometimes you get a little bit of all kinds of things. So it could be like I recently worked on a coffee table book, which was spotlighting female artists. So it was images and captions and very different. My work with the publishing houses, they were all kind of history related books or military related books, aviation. So again, that was very different. I mean, it's all non-fiction, but different.
Because some are very self-helpy and some are like technical textbooks almost, aren't they? And other, like your military stuff, I would think either history or technical.
Yeah. So some of the aircraft ones, oh my goodness, they can be very technical. I mean, fortunately, my husband's aircrew, so he's like good brains to pick. So they can be quite technical. The history ones, there's lots of back checking and things, because quite often, surprisingly, people get the dates a little bit wrong and things like that. So there is different things. I mean, this is another thing. I know in fiction, there's an element of obviously fact checking in a different sense.
My editor fact checks.
And I do a little bit of historical fiction, and again, you have to check certain facts with that. But certainly with non-fiction, there are things like conversions. Again, I mean, this does tend to be more for the publishing houses, but some of them, the more technical ones, and they have things like references as well, and there's more components which self-publishing don't tend to so much.
Yeah, and that's also makes the formatting different, doesn't it? If I was, you've already answered, do you also proofread? Obviously, you would proofread a book you haven't edited, I take it, and if you'd edited it, you would get one of your other team to proofread. Is that the way you work?
Yeah. So I still do a little bit of proofreading, but I prefer the editing. So I tend to, if I get the choice, I'd rather do editing. But I do, I still do a bit.
And in terms of pricing then, for say just a line edit we're talking about at the minute, what can I expect to pay? Does it differ, or is it a flat rate?
I mean, I guess it's like any industry, really. You are going to get a variation of prices depending on where you go and what kind of service you're looking for. For kind of ballpark, I always suggest people look at the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading. They have industry guidelines, so they have what they call the minimum suggested rates. So for copy editing, that is copy line editing, that's about £31 an hour. You can work it out like on average. I mean, again, people's editing rates differ, but for me, it's about 2,000 words an hour. So then you can kind of work out a little bit more how much it's going to cost. Then you have to take into account, as you'll know as an author, it's not just one round of editing. So you do the initial round of editing, and then obviously it comes back and you do a second, less comprehensive, doesn't take as long. So you have to factor that in. So it's really annoying, but it's really hard to give like a set answer because it does vary and people have different rates. I find that actually with all the books that I've edited, the standard hasn't varied hugely. It really hasn't. And obviously you have a conversation with the author before you decide to work together. We offer sample edits where it's up to 2,500 words, which we charge for, but that money is taken off the final fee if they decide to go with us.
If they decide to go with you,
Yeah,
that's fair, isn't it? I mean, I always think that non-fiction is easier to write than fiction, but I might be wrong in that because I suppose it depends on what the non-fiction is, and
yes, so
because you still need to make it. Certainly, if you're writing self-help, you need to make it readable still, and even memoirs, they have to come alive. So in a sense, you can't just say, well, I walked down the road.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely overlaps, especially with memoir and fiction, because you still have to think about telling your story in a creative and engaging way.
Yeah.
It is different, but there are some commonalities.
Yeah, that's good. And do you write yourself? Are you a writer?
So I have just started. So I have about 3 different books in my head that I want to do. So I'm currently studying for my master's. I'm about 2/3 of the way through. So as soon as that is out of the way, I'm going to be focusing on my book plan. So yeah, I am a newbie author. So you could probably teach me a thing or two about writing.
Masters in creative writing or masters in something
applied
else?
linguistics.
Oh, that sounds incredibly difficult. Mine was in creative writing.
I think it sounds fancier than it is, maybe.
And your writing then, is that going to be non-fiction or fiction or a mixture of both?
I think I'm going to start with non-fiction because that is my comfort zone. But I do have, I want to write a book about my granddad's experiences in the war, in World War II. So I'm kind of toying with making that fiction based on fact. Yeah, I'm thinking some kind of Tattooist of Auschwitz kind of vibe.
Oh,
so
okay.
It's based on a true story, lots of elements of truth, but it's told in a fictional way.
Okay, I've got you. I love that book.
It's amazing.
Oh, heartbreaking, but yes, it's very good. How much time do you have to dedicate to editing? Do you take breaks, and if so, how often would you break away from?
Yeah, I am not very good at taking breaks. I should. I normally get to a point where it's kind of slowing down and I can feel my concentration is lagging, and then I'll take a break. So normally I can work kind of a couple of hours, really, then I need to take a break. If I try and push through, which sometimes you kind of get in the rhythm of something, maybe 3 hours, but you do get to a point where it's just like you can feel you're not being as efficient as you could be.
Yeah, and that's when you need to stop. Same with writing. You can write, and then it starts to become a load of waffle, and you think, oh dear, I don't know why I pushed myself to do that extra hour. So are you somebody, would you read the whole book first and then start the editing process so that you get a feeling for the style of book it is, or do you get straight into the line edit?
So I do know that some editors do like to read the whole book first. I find it really hard to do that and not start doing anything.
I know, yeah. Oh, I've got to correct that.
I know. So what I tend to do is I do 2 read-throughs. So I do the first read-through where I'm reading it for the story, the sense. And if I see things, I will obviously mark them up or highlight things to come back to. And then I will always go through it a second time because I always find that there'll be things that I missed the first time that I pick up the second time. So I do start the editing straight away, but I do it over 2 rounds before I send it back.
And you prefer a Word document as a manuscript, do you? You prefer to work in Word?
Yep. So Word is definitely my format of choice. It's for editing, it's the easiest. It's also what the Proofreader software is linked to.
Ah, gotcha.
So there's that, and also in terms of like track changes and that kind of thing, it's really the best. It's the best format to use.
Yeah. And so we've talked about that, and where does where does the majority of your work come from, and do you have to advertise?
So it's a real mixture. Some of it is through social media marketing. So I have social media accounts, so some of them come through. Mostly it's LinkedIn or Instagram. Some through networking and word of mouth. Obviously, the longer you do something and the more clients you have, your name gets then recommended. So it gets a little bit easier because people are passing your name around, which is lovely. Also, I am a professional member of the Chartered Institute of Editing and Proofreading and a vetted member of the Alliance of Independent Authors. So they're both, you have to go through an application process and a vetting process for those. But once you've got the requisite experience and the training, then you can join their directories, which again, people can go and they can like find you on there. Which is another way that some of my clients find me.
Because I was going to say, it's probably harder doing non-fiction because you don't get so much repeat business, in a sense. Like I write in series, so my editor has done 15 books now, so she's getting repeat work all the time.
That's true. I mean, sometimes they do, and a lot of the authors do have aspirations to write more than one, but not in the same way as some fiction author who's writing a series of books. Absolutely. What I would say is that probably I have noticed, certainly recently, and with kind of the real increase in growth in self-publishing, is that more and more business owners are looking to write a book. So there is lots of business out there. There's lots of demand for it. But I probably would agree that most people, certainly initially, maybe they just think about writing the one book. And then maybe once they've done it, see how it goes, and then maybe write subsequent ones after.
So is your busiest time of year January, when everybody wants to write a self-help book?
I think there is, because I've had a look and kind of, tracked my years to see kind of the busy times, and there is no real pattern. I mean, summer slows down because people are on holiday and like less inclined to really think, especially with being kind of working with entrepreneurs and that kind of thing. But the kind of the time
in the Caribbean.
Well, yes, some of them are really lucky, but some of them, the time that they think about writing the book is not necessarily the time that they're ready for working with an editor. So it really does vary. So I wouldn't say there's one particular time that was super busy.
And what's the average length of book that you edit?
About
60. I was going to say that's about right. I mean, there are some shorter how-to books, aren't there? But and then there's also some huge tomes.
I mean, it does vary. So I've done books that kind of 20,000, 30,000 words. And I've done longer ones that are up to kind of about 90. But I would say on average 60. And I think I like that kind of length. And when you hold a book that's 60,
it feels right, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Mine are between 60 and 70 usually. So, and that you just know the feel of that.
Yeah.
And also as a writer, when you need to finish this, because actually otherwise it's just too long for people. And I think the days of Dickens, when the longer the better.
Yeah, and I think people are busy these days. There's a lot of demands on our time. And so I think when someone's faced with a really big book, it can be a little bit intimidating to think, I haven't got the time to read that massive book. So I think there is definitely merit in having shorter books. And certainly with personal development, self-help, people are reading it because they want to learn something. They want to have a transformation and hope, improve their lives, hopefully. And so, they want to get to that point sooner rather than later.
Yeah, where they can get on with it. I mean, I'm the same. When I read anything that's educational, I don't want them to waffle on for 80,000 words. I want to be able to put into practice what I've read. So, keep it brief. Let me get on with it, but not so brief that they haven't bothered. As an editor of non-fiction, do you have a preference?
What kind of non-fiction?
Yeah.
I love personal development because that's what I love to read. So, I mean, I love the memoirs. I really do. And they're always more challenging, but in a good way. It's a very different project. But the reason I chose to niche down and to work with kind of self-help personal development and then, genres around that is because that's what I like to read in my spare time. So, and I thought, if it's my business, so I can choose, what I want to focus on. And so, I feel really lucky that I get to actually.
You should be able to choose. I choose what I want to write. It might be I mean, obviously, I wouldn't want to. Well, I might want to write a passion project, which nobody would read, but I do need to make a living as well. So obviously, I choose what I want to write within the confines of having an audience to read it. And you, and you need people who are going to come to you and say, "I've got this book. I need it editing." Tell us again the name of your business.
So it's Jessica Kate Brown. So you can find me on all the social channels or jessicakatebrown.com.
Okay, I will put those down in the links below. What would you say to somebody who's starting out as an editor and they want to go down this route? What is the key thing that person needs to do?
I think initially, if you have no in-house background and experience, then really getting that initial training is super important because you don't know what you don't know. The proofreading was the first course I did, and I thought I knew what proofreading was, and it didn't. When I did the course, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't have a clue, did I?" So I think getting that, and again, like I said, for not just to give you kind of credibility and to make sure that your clients are really getting the service that they're paying for, but for your own personal confidence, it's really important to take that initial step.
And I always like to ask everybody who comes on the show if they could recommend a book. And you can recommend a book that you haven't edited, and it can be fiction or non-fiction. What would you say is a must-read?
So I would say, this is for people that want to write. It's my favourite kind of writing memoir. It's Bird by Bird by Anne Lamott. I think it's such a beautiful book, and it's so inspirational and motivating for people that are starting their writing journey.
Okay, I've never heard of it, and
definitely I'll check it out. Yeah, and she's got a really good YouTube TED Talk as well. Check her out on YouTube. It's amazing.
I'll check that out myself. And do you do YouTube? Do you have a?
I'm not on YouTube.
Are you on TikTok?
So I have a TikTok account. It's not very active.
Okay, we'll stick with your Facebook, Instagram, and website for now, and LinkedIn. Oh, it's been a pleasure, Jessica. It's been always a pleasure to talk about editing and to hear about your background in particular. And if anybody is looking for a non-fiction editor, Jessica's the person. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so lovely to talk to you.
It's been my pleasure. So that was an interesting chat with Jessica Brown. Jessica is an editor of non-fiction. If you're thinking of writing anything to do with non-fiction, self-help, technical books, memoirs, Jessica's the person to go to. I'll put all her details in the notes below. And please, if you've enjoyed this video, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, where you will get more like this every week. But for now, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.